The iron shackles around Beatrice Emerson's wrists had worn her skin raw, but the humiliation cut deeper than any physical wound ever could as she stood on the crude wooden platform in the center of the Silver Spur Saloon, every eye in the smoke-filled room fixed on her like she was nothing more than livestock at auction. Los Lunas, New Mexico, 1876, was a town that had seen its share of moral compromises, but Beatrice had never imagined she would become one of them. The saloon owner, a greasy man named Silas Crane with a handlebar mustache that drooped past his chin, rubbed his fat hands together as he surveyed the crowd of miners, drifters, and cowhands who had gathered for what he called his special entertainment of the evening. Beatrice's employer for the past 3 months, Crane had turned vicious the moment she refused his advances, and when she tried to leave his establishment, he claimed she owed him money for room and board, far more than she could ever repay with her wages as a serving girl. "Gentlemen," Crane announced, his voice booming across the crowded room, "this here is Miss Beatrice, 22 years old, educated back east, and, as you can see, easy on the eyes. Her debt to me stands at $500, a sum I'm willing to transfer to any man here willing to pay it. She'll work off what you pay, however you see fit, for however long it takes." Beatrice felt bile rise in her throat. She had come west after her parents died of fever in Boston, seeking a fresh start and perhaps adventure in the territory she had only read about in novels. Instead, she had found herself trapped, first by circumstance, then by a man who saw women as property to be exploited. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her simple cotton dress, once a cheerful blue, was now faded and stained. She kept her green eyes fixed on a point above the crowd's heads, refusing to meet any of their gazes, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. The bidding started at $50. A grizzled miner with blackened teeth raised his hand, leering at her with undisguised hunger. Another man, a freighter who smelled of whiskey even from across the room, bid $75. Beatrice's heart hammered against her ribs. She had heard stories of women who disappeared into the desert with men like these, never to be seen again. Her fingers trembled as she gripped the fabric of her dress, trying to maintain some shred of dignity. $100, called a voice from the back. The crowd murmured and shifted, craning their necks to see who had spoken. Beatrice dared to look, and her eyes landed on a tall cowboy who had been sitting alone at a corner table. He stood now, his hat pulled low over his face, but she could see a strong jaw and broad shoulders beneath a worn leather vest. Something about his posture suggested he was different from the others, less predatory, but Beatrice had learned not to trust appearances. $150, the freighter countered, not willing to give up easily. $200, the cowboy said, his voice calm and steady. Silas Crane's eyes gleamed with greed. This was going better than he had hoped. $200 from the gentleman in the back. Do I hear $250? The freighter hesitated, counting his money in his head, but before he could speak, another voice rang out. $225, said a cattle buyer who had been nursing a whiskey at the bar. $300, the cowboy said, and this time he stepped forward into the lamplight. Beatrice saw him clearly now. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-bronzed skin and hair the color of wheat that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes, a striking shade of blue-gray, swept across the room with a quiet authority that made several men step back. He wore a single revolver on his hip, the handle worn smooth from use, and his clothes, though dusty from travel, were well maintained. There was something honest in his face, something that made Beatrice's breath catch despite her fear. $300 going once, Crane said, barely containing his excitement. Going twice. No one else bid. The freighter spat on the floor in disgust and turned away. The miner shook his head and went back to his card game. The cowboy walked forward, pulling a leather pouch from his vest pocket. He counted out the money in crisp bills and gold coins, placing them on the bar with deliberate care. Crane snatched up the money, biting one of the gold pieces to test it, then grinned. "Sold to Mr. Thomas Barrett. She's all yours, friend. Here's the papers showing the transfer of debt." Thomas Barrett took the papers without looking at them, and finally raised his eyes to meet Beatrice's. She saw no cruelty there, no triumph, just a deep weariness that seemed to match her own. He climbed onto the platform and, to her shock, pulled a knife from his boot. She flinched backward, but he held up his other hand in a calming gesture. "I'm going to cut those shackles," he said quietly, his voice meant only for her. "Then we're going to walk out of here. Can you do that?" Beatrice nodded, not trusting her voice. The metal gave way under his blade with a sharp crack, and suddenly her hands were free. She rubbed her wrists, feeling blood rush back into her fingers. Thomas took off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders, a gesture so unexpectedly gentle that tears sprang to her eyes. "Let's go," he said. They walked through the crowd together, Thomas keeping himself between Beatrice and the other men. She could feel their eyes following her, hear their crude comments, but Thomas ignored them all. When they stepped out into the cool night air of the New Mexico desert, Beatrice gulped in deep breaths, feeling as though she had been drowning and had just broken the surface. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Thomas led her toward a hitching post where a large buckskin horse stood waiting, its reins loosely tied. "Nowhere you don't want to go," he replied. He pulled the papers Crane had given him from his pocket and, to Beatrice's astonishment, tore them in half, then in quarters, letting the pieces flutter to the ground. "You're free. You don't owe me anything. You don't owe anyone anything." Beatrice stared at him, unable to comprehend what he was saying. "But you just paid $300. "I did. Why?" Thomas was silent for a long moment, his eyes scanning the dark street as if checking for threats. "Because no human being should be sold like that. Because I have a sister back in Texas, and I'd hope someone would do the same for her if she ever found herself in such a situation. Because it was the right thing to do." "I have nowhere to go," Beatrice admitted, the reality of her situation crashing down on her. She had no money, no possessions beyond the clothes on her back, and no prospects. Crane had taken everything from her, including the small savings she had arrived with, claiming it toward her supposed debt. Thomas considered this, then said, "I'm headed to a ranch about 20 miles south of here, the Broken Arrow. My friend Jacob runs it, and his wife might have work for you if you're willing. Kitchen help, maybe, or helping with the children. Honest work with fair pay. I can take you there, or I can give you enough money to get on a stage heading wherever you want to go. Your choice." Beatrice looked into his face, searching for any sign of deception, but found none. Everything in her wanted to trust him, but she had been fooled before. Still, what choice did she have? The desert at night was dangerous, full of rattlesnakes, scorpions, and men far worse than either. At least this man had shown her kindness when he could have done otherwise. "The ranch," she said finally. "I'll go to the ranch." Thomas nodded and untied his horse. "This is Buck. He's strong enough to carry us both, though we'll have to go slow." He mounted first, then reached down to help her up. Beatrice hesitated only a moment before taking his hand, surprised by the warmth and strength in his grip. He pulled her up behind him with easy strength, and she settled onto the horse's back, acutely aware of how close she was to him, her arms wrapping around his waist to keep from falling. "Hold on tight," Thomas said, and nudged Buck into a gentle walk. They left Los Lunas behind, the sounds of the saloon fading into the distance. The night sky stretched above them, vast and filled with more stars than Beatrice had ever seen in Boston. The desert air was cool and clean, scented with sage and creosote. Despite everything, despite the horror of the past few hours, Beatrice felt something like hope stirring in her chest. They rode in silence for a while, the steady rhythm of the horse's gait soothing. Finally, Beatrice gathered her courage and asked, "Why were you in that saloon?" "Passing through," Thomas replied. "I've been driving cattle from Texas to Kansas. Just finished a drive and I'm heading back home. Stopped in Los Lunas for a meal and heard Crane making his announcement. Couldn't stomach what I was hearing, so I figured I'd put a stop to it. You spent your cattle drive wages on me. Money comes and goes. A clear conscience is harder to buy." Beatrice found herself smiling, despite everything. "You're an unusual man, Thomas Barrett." "Just Tom is fine." "Tom," she repeated, testing the name. "I'm Beatrice, though most people call me B." "B," he said, and she liked the way it sounded in his deep voice. They continued riding, and Beatrice found herself relaxing against Tom's broad back. The fear that had been her constant companion for months began to ease, replaced by a curious warmth. She studied what she could see of him in the moonlight, the strong line of his shoulders, the capable hands holding the reins, the way he sat his horse like he had been born in the saddle. "Tell me about this ranch," she said, wanting to hear him talk more. "The Broken Arrow belongs to Jacob and Mary Brennan. Good people. They have 3 children, all under 10 years old. Jacob and I drove cattle together for years before he settled down. He's been after me to do the same, find a place to put down roots, but I've always been more comfortable on the trail. Do you have family besides your sister? Tom's shoulders tensed slightly. My parents died when I was 17. Yellow fever took them both within a week. My sister Sarah was only 12. I raised her as best I could while working ranches across Texas. She married a school teacher a few years back, settled in San Antonio. They're happy, which is all I ever wanted for her. That must have been difficult, losing your parents so young and having to care for a child. We did what we had to do. Sarah's strong, stronger than me in many ways. She was the one who kept pushing me to get an education, to read books, to be more than just a cowhand. I owe her more than I can say. Beatrice felt a kinship with this man growing. They had both known loss, both carried responsibilities beyond their years. I lost my parents to fever too, she confessed. It was last year. I was alone in Boston with no family, no prospects. I had read about the West, about opportunities and new beginnings. I thought I could make something of myself here. Instead, I found myself working in that saloon, and when Crane started making his demands, I realized I had walked into a trap. You're out of it now, Tom said firmly, and you're going to be all right. Mary Brennan is a good woman. She'll help you. They rode on through the night, the desert landscape slowly transforming around them. The flat plains gave way to rolling hills dotted with juniper and piñon pine. In the distance, mountains rose like dark sentinels against the starlit sky. Beatrice had never seen country like this, so wild and untamed, beautiful in its harshness. As dawn began to paint the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold, they crested a rise, and Tom pointed ahead. There, the broken arrow. Beatrice saw a cluster of buildings nestled in a small valley. A ranch house built of adobe and wood, a large barn, several corrals, and what looked like bunkhouses for ranch hands. Smoke rose from the chimney of the main house, suggesting someone was already awake and starting breakfast. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, and the whole scene had an air of peaceful prosperity. They rode down into the valley, and before they reached the house, the front door opened and a woman stepped out. She was perhaps 30 years old, with auburn hair pinned up in a practical bun and a flour-dusted apron over her dress. Her face lit up when she saw Tom. "Tom Barrett, is that you?" she called, shading her eyes against the rising sun. "Morning, Mary," Tom called back. He dismounted and helped Beatrice down, steadying her when her legs wobbled from the long ride. Mary hurried over, her eyes taking in Beatrice's disheveled appearance and the raw marks on her wrists with a woman's quick understanding. "Come inside, both of you. You look like you've had a rough night. Jacob," she called back toward the house. "Tom's here, and he's brought a guest." A burly man with a rust-colored beard appeared in the doorway, his face breaking into a wide grin when he saw Tom. "Well, I'll be damned. Thought you'd be halfway to Texas by now." "Got delayed," Tom said simply. He gave Jacob a meaningful look, and the other man's expression sobered. Inside, the ranch house was warm and welcoming, filled with the smell of coffee and fresh bread. Mary ushered Beatrice to a chair at the large wooden table, while Tom spoke quietly with Jacob near the door. Beatrice couldn't hear what they were saying, but she saw Jacob's face darken with anger, and Mary touched her arm gently. "Let me see those wrists," Mary said softly. Beatrice extended her arms, and Mary made a sympathetic noise. "I'll get some salve. Tom, you can tell us the whole story over breakfast, but first, this young lady needs tending to." Mary disappeared and returned with a tin of something that smelled of herbs and beeswax. As she gently cleaned and treated Beatrice's wrists, she said, "I'm Mary Brennan, and that bear of a man over there is my husband Jacob. What's your name, dear?" "Beatrice Emerson, but please call me Bea." "Well, Bea, you're safe here. Whatever brought you to our door, you're among friends now." Over breakfast, Tom explained what had happened in Los Lunas. Jacob's anger grew with every word, and when Tom finished, the rancher slammed his fist on the table. "Silas Crane ought to be horsewhipped. Selling a woman like she was property. It makes my blood boil." "It's over now," Tom said quietly. "Bea is free, and I made sure Crane understood that if anything happens to her, I'll be back to settle accounts." Mary looked at Beatrice with kind eyes. "Tom mentioned you might be looking for work. I could certainly use help around here. My youngest has been sickly this winter, and I'm behind on everything from cooking to mending to managing the garden. If you're willing, I can offer you room, board, and $20 a month. It's honest work, and you'd be treated with respect." Tears sprang to Beatrice's eyes. "I would be grateful for the opportunity, Mrs. Brennan. Mary, please. We're going to be friends, I can tell." After breakfast, Mary showed Beatrice to a small room off the kitchen. It was simple but clean, with a real bed, a washstand, and even a window with curtains. "It's not much," Mary apologized, "but it's yours for as long as you want it." "It's perfect," Beatrice said, her voice thick with emotion. After months of sleeping on a straw pallet in a drafty storeroom, this felt like luxury. Mary left her to rest, and Beatrice sank onto the bed, suddenly exhausted. But despite her weariness, sleep wouldn't come. Her mind kept returning to Tom Barrett, to the way he had stepped forward when no one else would, to the gentleness in his rough hands, to the quiet strength in his voice. She had met many men since coming west, but none like him. Outside her window, she could hear Tom talking with Jacob about cattle and water rights and other ranch matters. His voice carried a natural authority, and she realized he was the kind of man other men respected and listened to. When she finally did sleep, she dreamed not of the horror in the saloon, but of riding through the desert under starlight, safe in the circle of strong arms. Beatrice woke in the afternoon to find Mary had left clean clothes folded on the chair beside her bed. A simple brown skirt and white blouse, undergarments, and even a pair of serviceable boots. They fit reasonably well, and Beatrice felt more human than she had in months as she dressed and pinned up her hair. When she emerged from her room, she found Mary in the kitchen kneading bread dough while 3 children played on the floor nearby. "There you are," Mary said cheerfully. "I hope you don't mind, but I borrowed some of my old clothes for you. We're about the same size. Children, come meet Miss B." The 3 children scrambled to their feet. The oldest, a girl of about 9 with her mother's auburn hair, curtsied prettily. "I'm Emma," she said. "This is my brother Luke, and that's baby Josephine, though we call her Josie." Luke was perhaps 6, with his father's rusty coloring and a gap-toothed grin. Josie, who looked to be about 3, peeked shyly from behind her sister's skirts. Beatrice felt her heart warm at the sight of them. "It's very nice to meet you all," she said. "Are you going to live here now?" Luke asked, with the directness of children. "For a while, yes. I'm going to help your mother." "Good," Emma said seriously. "Mama's been awful tired lately." Mary laughed. "Emma, you're not supposed to tell people that, but yes, I have been tired. Having another woman around will be wonderful." Beatrice threw herself into work, grateful for the distraction and the chance to repay Mary's kindness. She helped finish the bread, started on a mountain of mending, and played with the children when they grew restless. As the afternoon wore on, she found herself glancing out the window repeatedly, looking for Tom, but she didn't see him until supper. He appeared at the door just as Mary was setting the table, his hat in his hands and his hair damp, as if he had just washed up at the pump. His eyes found Beatrice immediately, and something in his expression made her cheeks warm. "You look rested," he said. "I feel almost human again, thanks to your friends." They sat down to supper together, the whole family plus Tom and 2 ranch hands who worked for Jacob. It was the kind of meal Beatrice remembered from her childhood before her parents died, noisy and warm, filled with laughter and easy conversation. The food was simple but delicious, and there was plenty of it. She found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in over a year, since before her world had fallen apart. After supper, Tom asked if she would like to take a walk, and Beatrice agreed, ignoring Mary's knowing smile. They strolled away from the house as the sun set, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple. The evening air was cool and sweet, carrying the scent of sage on a gentle breeze. "How are you really?" Tom asked when they were out of earshot of the house. "Overwhelmed," Beatrice admitted. "Yesterday I thought my life was over. Today I have a home, work, and people who treat me with kindness. It feels like a dream. It's real, and it's what you deserve." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, following a well-worn path that led to a small creek. The water burbled over smooth stones, and cottonwood trees rustled overhead. Tom sat on a large boulder near the bank, and Beatrice settled beside him, careful to maintain a proper distance but acutely aware of his presence. "What will you do now?" she asked. "You said you were heading back to Texas." Tom picked up a pebble and tossed it into the water, watching the ripples spread. "I should head south, but I think I might stay around here for a while. Jacob mentioned he could use another hand for a few weeks, and I've got nothing pressing waiting for me." Beatrice's heart lifted at this news, though she tried to keep her voice neutral. I'm sure Jacob would appreciate the help." Tom turned to look at her, and in the fading light, his blue-gray eyes seemed to see right through her careful facade. "That's not the only reason I'm staying." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken feelings. Beatrice felt her breath catch. "Tom, I know it's too soon," he said quickly. "I know you've been through hell, and the last thing you need is some cowboy complicating things. But I'd like to get to know you better, if you're willing. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people becoming friends." Beatrice felt warmth spread through her chest. In the short time she had known this man, he had shown her more respect and consideration than anyone had in months. "I'd like that," she said softly. His smile transformed his face, making him look younger and less careworn. They talked as the stars came out, sharing stories of their childhoods, their hopes, their losses. Beatrice learned that Tom loved books, particularly histories and adventure stories, which his sister had insisted he read. He learned that Beatrice had once dreamed of being a teacher herself, that she loved music though she had never learned to play an instrument, that she missed the ocean terribly, but was coming to appreciate the stark beauty of the desert. When they finally walked back to the ranch house, it felt as though they had known each other far longer than a single day. Tom bid her good night at the door, his eyes lingering on her face, and Beatrice went to bed with a strange flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with fear. The days that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Beatrice worked alongside Mary, learning the routines of ranch life. She cooked and cleaned, mended clothes, and helped in the garden, played with the children, and gradually felt the tension that had lived in her shoulders for months begin to ease. Mary proved to be not just an employer, but a friend, quick with a joke or a word of encouragement, generous with her praise and her patience. Tom stayed on at the Broken Arrow, working with Jacob and the other hands to repair fences, move cattle, and prepare for the spring calving season. But every evening he found time to walk with Beatrice, to talk with her, to slowly build something between them that felt both fragile and incredibly strong. One evening, about 2 weeks after Beatrice's arrival, Tom asked if she would like to ride out to see the upper pastures. Jacob lent her a gentle mare named Daisy, and though Beatrice had never been much of a rider, she found herself enjoying the experience. Tom was patient, showing her how to sit properly, how to guide the horse with subtle movements rather than force. They rode up into the foothills as the sun began its descent, and Tom showed her a vista that took her breath away. From their vantage point, they could see for miles, the ranch below, the town of Los Lunas in the distance, and beyond it, the vast sweep of the New Mexico territory stretching toward the horizon. "This is incredible," Beatrice breathed. "I thought you might like it. When I first came here with Jacob years ago, I spent a whole afternoon just sitting up here, trying to take it all in. The West has a way of making you feel small and significant all at once." Beatrice understood exactly what he meant. She had felt so trapped in Boston after her parents died, suffocated by memories and expectations. Even when she had first arrived in the territories, working in the saloon, she had felt confined. But here, with the wind in her hair and endless sky above, she felt free in a way she had never experienced. "Thank you," she said, turning to Tom, "for everything, for saving me, for bringing me here, for these past weeks. I don't know how to repay you." Tom's expression grew serious. "B, you don't owe me anything. I keep telling you that. I know, but I want you to understand how much it means. You gave me my life back." He reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair that had escaped her braid behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "You're giving me something too," he said softly. "A reason to stop drifting, a reason to think about putting down roots." Beatrice's heart hammered in her chest. "Tom, I'm falling in love with you," he said, the words tumbling out as if he couldn't hold them back any longer. "I know it's fast, and I know you might not feel the same way, but I had to tell you. These past weeks, getting to know you, watching you laugh with the children, seeing how strong you are despite everything you've been through, you've made me want things I never let myself want before. A home, a family, a future that's more than just the next cattle drive." Tears sprang to Beatrice's eyes, but they were happy tears. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I was afraid to admit it, afraid that I was just feeling grateful or confused. But it's more than that. You make me feel safe and seen and valued. When I'm with you, I feel like myself again, like the person I was before everything fell apart." Tom's face broke into a brilliant smile, and he leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. But Beatrice met him halfway, her eyes closing as his lips touched hers in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling, and Tom rested his forehead against hers. "I don't have much to offer you," he said. "I've got some money saved from years of cattle drives, and I'm good with horses and cattle, but I'm not a wealthy man." "I don't want wealth," Beatrice replied. "I want honesty and kindness and love. You've already given me all three." They rode back to the ranch as twilight fell, hands clasped between their horses, both filled with a joy that felt almost too big to contain. When they arrived, Mary took one look at their faces and burst out laughing. "Well, it's about time," she said. "Jacob owes me $5. I told him you two would figure it out within the month." Beatrice felt her cheeks burn, but she couldn't stop smiling. Tom just laughed and pulled her close against his side, his arm around her waist, and Beatrice leaned into his warmth, marveling at how much her life had changed in such a short time. The following weeks were some of the happiest Beatrice had ever known. She and Tom spent every moment they could together, though always mindful of propriety. They talked about their future, making plans that grew more concrete with each passing day. Tom spoke to Jacob about the possibility of buying some land nearby, starting his own small ranch. He had enough saved for a down payment, and Jacob knew of several parcels that might be available. "I don't want to take you away from Mary and the children," Tom said to Beatrice one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I know you've come to care for them." "And they'll be our neighbors," Beatrice pointed out. "We can visit regularly. But, Tom, I want to build something with you, our own home, our own life. That's what I want more than anything." He squeezed her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Then that's what we'll do. But first, I want to do this properly." 3 months after the night Tom had bought Beatrice's freedom in the Los Lunas Saloon, he asked her to marry him. It was evening, and they had ridden out to their favorite spot in the foothills. The spring wildflowers were in bloom, painting the landscape in yellows and purples, and the air was warm and sweet. Tom dismounted and helped Beatrice down. Then, to her surprise, he took both her hands in his and dropped to one knee. "Beatrice Emerson," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "you are the strongest, kindest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. You've made me believe in the future again, made me want to be a better man. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" He pulled a simple gold band from his pocket, and Beatrice saw that it had a small turquoise stone set into it, the color of the New Mexico sky. Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Tom, I'll marry you. I love you so much." He slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, pulling her into his arms and kissing her deeply. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying at once, Beatrice felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. She had come west seeking a new beginning and had found so much more than she ever dreamed possible. They were married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony at the ranch. Mary helped Beatrice make a dress from cream-colored silk that a traveling merchant had in his wagon, and Emma wove wildflowers into a crown for Beatrice's hair. The local circuit preacher performed the ceremony under the cottonwood trees by the creek, with Jacob serving as Tom's best man and Mary standing up for Beatrice. The Brennan children scattered flower petals, and even baby Josie managed to behave herself through the short service. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Tom kissed Beatrice with such tenderness that several of the ranch hands who had gathered to witness the ceremony had to clear their throats and look away. Mary cried happy tears, and Jacob clapped Tom so hard on the back that he nearly knocked him over. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful. Mary had cooked for days, preparing a feast that covered every surface of the ranch house dining room. There was music from a fiddle player who worked on a neighboring ranch, and dancing that lasted until the stars came out. Beatrice danced with Tom, with Jacob, with each of the ranch hands in turn, but her eyes always returned to her new husband, and each time she found him already looking at her with such love that it took her breath away. That night, Tom carried Beatrice over the threshold of the small cabin that Jacob had helped him build on the land he had purchased just 3 miles from the Broken Arrow. It wasn't large, just 4 rooms, but it was solidly built and all their own. Tom had spent weeks working on it, often late into the night after his regular work was done, determined to have it ready for their wedding day. Inside, Mary had helped Beatrice prepare earlier in the day. Wildflowers filled jars on the table and windowsills, and the bed was made up with a beautiful quilt that Mary had given them as a wedding present, each square stitched with care and love. A fire crackled in the hearth, taking the chill off the spring evening. Tom set Beatrice down gently, his hands lingering at her waist. "Welcome home, Mrs. Barrett." "Mrs. Barrett?" Beatrice repeated, trying out the name. "I like the sound of that." They moved together naturally, helping each other out of their wedding finery, laughing when Tom's fingers fumbled with the tiny buttons on her dress, kissing when his hands finally succeeded in freeing her from the silk. Their lovemaking was tender and sweet, a physical expression of the love they had declared to each other so many times in words. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, the quilt pulled up around them, talking quietly about their hopes and dreams for the future. "I want to build a real ranch," Tom said, idly playing with Beatrice's long hair. "Not huge, but successful. Enough to support us and, God willing, a family. I want our children to grow up here, to know this land and love it the way I've come to." "I want that too," Beatrice said softly. "I want children who can run free, who never know what it's like to feel trapped or helpless. I want to give them the kind of childhood we both lost too early." "We'll do it together," Tom promised. "Everything together." The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. Building a ranch from nearly nothing required backbreaking work from dawn until long after dark. Tom worked himself to exhaustion, fencing pastures, building a barn, buying their first small herd of cattle. Beatrice kept the house, planted an ambitious garden, and took in sewing from neighboring ranches to add a little extra money to their savings. There were times when money was so tight that they lived on beans and cornbread for days at a stretch. There were times when Tom came home so tired that he could barely speak, and Beatrice would help him wash and feed him and tuck him into bed like one of the Brennan children. There were times when Beatrice felt overwhelmed by loneliness, when Tom had to be away for days at a time, moving cattle or working a temporary job to earn extra money. But through it all, their love sustained them. Tom never failed to kiss Beatrice goodbye in the morning and hello in the evening, no matter how tired he was. Beatrice always had coffee ready when Tom needed it, a kind word when he was discouraged, faith in him when he doubted himself. They talked about everything, sharing their fears and hopes, their triumphs and failures, building a partnership that was as strong as it was loving. Mary remained a close friend, visiting regularly and always ready with advice or a sympathetic ear. The Brennan children loved visiting the Barrett Ranch, as they called it, and Emma in particular grew attached to Beatrice, often begging to stay overnight to help with chores. One afternoon in late summer, about 14 months after their wedding, Beatrice was working in the garden when a wave of dizziness washed over her. She sat down heavily on the ground, her hand pressed to her stomach, waiting for the world to stop spinning. When it finally did, she realized what the dizziness, combined with the nausea she had been experiencing for the past week in her missed monthly courses, meant. She was pregnant. Joy and fear warred within her. She wanted children desperately, had dreamed of starting a family with Tom, but she also knew the dangers of childbirth, especially out here where medical help was scarce. She sat in the garden for a long time, her hand resting on her still flat stomach, praying for the health and safety of the tiny life growing inside her. When Tom came home that evening, dusty and tired from a long day of moving cattle, Beatrice met him at the door with tears in her eyes. His face immediately filled with concern. "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" "No," she said, laughing and crying at once. "Tom, I'm gonna have a baby. We're gonna have a baby." For a moment, Tom just stared at her, as if he couldn't quite process what she had said. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way to the Brennan Ranch. He picked Beatrice up and spun her around, then immediately set her down again, looking worried. "Sorry, should I not have done that? Are you all right? Do you need to sit down? Should I get Mary?" Beatrice laughed at his panic. "I'm fine. The baby is fine. We're both fine. But yes, we should tell Mary soon. I'm going to need her help." Mary was delighted by the news and immediately took Beatrice under her wing, sharing all the wisdom she had gained from 3 pregnancies. She gave Beatrice recipes for tea that helped with the nausea, showed her how to sew tiny clothes, and reassured her when fear threatened to overwhelm her joy. Tom became almost comically protective. He insisted that Beatrice rest more, tried to take over all the heavy chores, and worried constantly about her health. Beatrice finally had to sit him down and explain that she was pregnant, not ill, and that she needed to keep active to stay strong for the birth. But she loved his concern, loved seeing how much he already cared for their unborn child. The months of pregnancy passed more quickly than Beatrice expected. Her belly grew round, and she felt the first flutters of movement that gradually became strong kicks and tumbles. Tom would spend hours in the evening with his hand on her stomach, marveling at each movement, talking to the baby about the ranch and the horses and everything they would do together. Winter came, and with it, preparations for the birth. Mary helped Beatrice prepare cloths and blankets, and they arranged for an experienced midwife from Los Lunas to come stay with them when Beatrice's time drew near. The midwife, a no-nonsense woman named Mrs. Chen, who had delivered hundreds of babies over her 40-year career, arrived 2 weeks before Beatrice's due date and settled into the spare room Tom had built onto the cabin. Beatrice went into labor on a cold February night, 2 years almost to the day after Tom had bought her freedom. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Tom paced outside the bedroom door, nearly wearing a groove in the wooden floor, while Mary and Mrs. Chen worked with Beatrice. He could hear her cries of pain, and each one felt like a knife to his heart, but Mary assured him everything was progressing normally. Finally, as the sun began to set on that long day, Beatrice gave a final scream, and a new sound filled the cabin, the strong, angry cry of a newborn baby. Tom burst through the door to find Mrs. Chen holding a squirming, red-faced infant while Mary helped clean up Beatrice, who lay exhausted but smiling against the pillows. "You have a son, Mrs." Chen announced, wrapping the baby in a soft blanket and handing him to Tom. A big, healthy boy. Tom looked down at his son's tiny face, at the dark hair plastered to his head, at the miniature fingers that immediately grasped Tom's thumb with surprising strength, and felt his eyes fill with tears. "He's perfect," he whispered. "Would you like to bring him to his mother?" Mary asked gently. Tom carefully sat on the edge of the bed and placed the baby in Beatrice's arms. She looked exhausted, her hair damp with sweat and dark circles under her eyes. But to Tom, she had never been more beautiful. She gazed down at their son with such love that Tom felt his heart might break from the fullness of it. "Hello, little one," Beatrice murmured. "We've been waiting for you." The baby stopped crying at the sound of his mother's voice, his eyes trying to focus on her face. Beatrice looked up at Tom, tears streaming down her cheeks. "We did it. We made this perfect little person." "You did it," Tom corrected, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "You're the strongest person I know." They named their son Theodore Benjamin Barrett, calling him Teddy. He was indeed a big baby, healthy and strong, lunged, and he quickly became the center of their world. Tom had thought he understood love before, had known he loved Beatrice with all his heart, but the love he felt for his son was something different, something that expanded his capacity for feeling in ways he hadn't known possible. The first months of Teddy's life were exhausting. Beatrice was up multiple times every night to nurse him, and during the day she struggled to keep up with housework while caring for an infant. Tom helped as much as he could, walking the floor with Teddy when he was fussy, changing diapers, bringing Beatrice meals while she nursed. They were both constantly tired, but they were also happier than they had ever been. As Teddy grew, his personality emerged. He was a cheerful baby, quick to smile and laugh, fascinated by everything around him. He particularly loved when Tom would carry him out to see the horses, his little face lighting up with wonder. The Brennan children doted on him, with Emma declaring herself his official big sister, even though they weren't related. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Tom's hard work and natural skill with cattle were paying off, and they were able to expand their herd significantly. They hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, young men who were learning the trade and who proved themselves reliable and hardworking. Money was no longer quite so tight, though they were still careful, remembering the lean times and saving for the future. When Teddy was 18 months old, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, or perhaps because she was stronger from all the hard work of ranch life. She continued to work through most of the pregnancy, only slowing down in the final weeks. Their second child, a daughter they named Rose Marie, was born on a beautiful spring morning when the wildflowers were blooming across the hills. The labor was shorter than Teddy's had been, and by afternoon, Beatrice was sitting up in bed, nursing her daughter, while Teddy, held securely in Tom's arms, stared at his baby sister with wide, curious eyes. "Baby," Teddy said, one of his favorite words. He reached out to touch Rose's tiny hand, and when her fingers wrapped around his face broke into a delighted smile. "Yes, this is your baby sister," Beatrice said softly. "You're going to be such a good big brother." With 2 young children, life became even busier. But Tom and Beatrice worked together seamlessly, partners in every aspect of their lives. They supported each other through the challenging moments and celebrated together during the joyful ones. Their love, instead of being diminished by the demands of children and ranch life, only grew deeper and stronger. 3 years after Rose was born, when Teddy was nearly 5 and Rose was 3, Beatrice found herself pregnant once more. This time, she gave birth to twin boys, whom they named Samuel Jacob and William Brennan, honoring the friends who had become like family to them. The twins were identical in appearance, but different in temperament from the start. Sam was quiet and observant, while Will was boisterous and adventurous. The house that had seemed adequate for 2 now bulged with a family of 6. Tom built on 2 more rooms, with help from Jacob and the ranch hands, creating space for his growing family. The ranch itself continued to expand. They now ran several hundred head of cattle and had established a reputation for quality stock that brought buyers from as far away as Kansas City. One evening, when Teddy was 8, Rose was 6, and the twins were 3, the whole family sat down for supper together. It was a noisy, chaotic affair, with the children chattering about their day, Teddy trying to act grown up while still being young enough to tease his siblings, Rose helping the twins cut their meat, and the boys arguing over who got the last piece of cornbread. Tom looked around the table at his family, at his wife, who still took his breath away after nearly a decade of marriage, at his 4 healthy, happy children, and felt overwhelming gratitude. He thought back to that night in Los Lunas, to the desperate woman standing on that auction platform, to his decision to step forward when he could have just walked away. "What are you thinking about?" Beatrice asked softly, seeing the expression on his face. "About how lucky I am," Tom replied. "About how one decision changed everything." Beatrice reached across the table to take his hand, mindful of their children's attention. "It changed everything for both of us. You gave me my life back that night, Tom. You gave me hope and freedom and love. You gave me all of this." She gestured to encompass the children, the house, the life they had built together. "Papa," Teddy said, "tell us the story again about how you met Mama." It had become a favorite family tale, though Tom and Beatrice always edited out the more disturbing details for the children's sake. They told a simplified version about how Mama had been in trouble, and Papa had helped her, and they had fallen in love. "Not tonight," Tom said with a smile. "Tonight, I think Mama should tell us a story about when she was a little girl back in Boston." Beatrice launched into a tale about the time she and her father had gone to the harbor and seen a huge ship coming in from England, and the children listened with rapt attention. Tom watched his wife as she spoke, still seeing in her the courage and strength that had first drawn him to her, now combined with the wisdom and grace she had gained over the years. After supper, after the children were tucked into bed with kisses and prayers, Tom and Beatrice stepped out onto the porch to enjoy the cool evening air. Tom wrapped his arms around Beatrice from behind, and she leaned back against his chest, both of them looking out over the land they had built their life on. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if things had gone differently that night?" Beatrice asked quietly. "If someone else had bid higher, or if you had decided not to intervene?" Tom tightened his arms around her. "Sometimes. But then I remind myself that we're here now, that those things didn't happen. We found each other, and we built this life together. That's what matters." "I used to have nightmares about it," Beatrice confessed. "In the first year especially. I would dream I was back on that platform, or that Crane had come to take me back, but I don't anymore. Now when I dream about this, our home, our children, growing old together." "We will grow old together," Tom promised. "We'll watch our children grow up and have children of their own. We'll work this land until we're too old to climb on a horse, and then we'll sit on this porch and watch our grandchildren work it. We'll have a good life. We already do." Beatrice turned in his arms so she could look up at his face, at the lines that years of sun and work had etched around his eyes. at the gray that was just beginning to show in his wheat-colored hair. He was 40 now, still strong and vital, but showing the marks of the hard life he led. She touched his face gently, loving every familiar plane and angle. "I love you, Tom Barrett, more than I did on our wedding day, more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. You are the best man I have ever known, and I thank God every day that you walked into that saloon." Tom kissed her, a slow, sweet kiss that still had the power to make her knees weak after all these years. "I love you too, Beatrice Barrett. You are my heart, my partner, my best friend. Everything good in my life comes from you." They stood together in the gathering darkness, holding each other, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. Cattle lowing in the distance, horses moving in the corral, the breeze rustling through the cottonwood trees. Inside the house, their children slept safe and secure, never knowing want or fear, surrounded by love. The years continued to pass, bringing both challenges and joys. There were hard winters when they lost cattle to cold and disease, and dry summers when the grass turned brown and water became scarce. There were injuries. Tom broke his leg in a fall from a horse when Teddy was 12, and Beatrice burned her hand badly when Rose was 10. There were illnesses. The twins both caught fever one terrible winter, and for 3 days and nights, Beatrice and Tom took turns sitting beside their beds, sponging them with cool water and praying for them to recover. They did. But those were the longest days of Tom and Beatrice's lives, but there was far more good than bad. They watched Teddy grow into a strong, capable young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Rose blossomed into a beautiful, spirited girl who had her mother's intelligence and her father's determination. The twins grew into identical young men who finished each other's sentences and worked together with an efficiency that amazed everyone who saw them. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Tom took Beatrice back to the spot in the foothills where he had proposed. They left the children with Mary and Jacob for the evening and rode out as the sun was setting, just as they had done so many times before. The view was just as spectacular as it had been all those years ago, and Beatrice still felt her breath catch at the beauty of it. 15 years, Tom said, helping her dismount. Sometimes it feels like 15 minutes, and sometimes it feels like we've always been together. "I prefer to think we've always been together," Beatrice said with a smile. "Even before we met, we were moving toward each other, our paths destined to cross." "I'm not sure I believe in destiny," Tom replied, pulling her close. "But I do believe in choice. I chose to help you that night. You chose to trust me. We chose to build this life together. Every day we choose each other, and that means more to me than any notion of fate." Beatrice kissed him, pouring 15 years of love and gratitude and partnership into that kiss. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "I have something for you," Tom said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small wooden box, clearly handmade, and opened it to reveal a delicate silver necklace. The pendant was a small turquoise stone, matching the stone in Beatrice's wedding ring, shaped like a heart. "Tom, it's beautiful," Beatrice breathed as he fastened it around her neck. "When did you have time to get this?" "I had it made by that silversmith who passed through last month. I wanted you to have something special, something that showed how much you mean to me." Beatrice touched the pendant, feeling its cool smoothness against her skin. "I didn't get you anything. You give me everything, every single day," Tom said seriously. "Your love, your partnership, the family we've built together, I don't need anything else." They sat together as the stars came out, talking about their children, their plans for the ranch, their hopes for the future. The easy intimacy of their conversation, the comfortable silences, the small touches and shared glances, all spoke of a love that had matured and deepened over time into something unshakable. As their children grew, Tom and Beatrice began to think about their legacy. They wanted to make sure the ranch would continue after they were gone, that all the work they had put into it would benefit their children and grandchildren. Tom drew up papers making sure the ranch would be divided fairly among their 4 children, with provisions that it should stay in the family if at all possible. Teddy, now 19, showed every sign of wanting to continue ranching. He had his father's natural way with cattle and his mother's head for business, and Tom began to teach him everything he knew about running the operation. Rose, at 17, surprised them by announcing she wanted to go to college in Santa Fe to become a teacher. Tom and Beatrice supported her decision, though they would miss her terribly. The twins, now 14, were still finding their way, but both loved the ranch and seemed likely to stay. One evening, when Teddy was 21 and had just announced his engagement to a sweet girl from a neighboring ranch, Tom and Beatrice took another of their walks to the creek. They were both showing their age now. Tom was 52, his hair more gray than gold, his movements slower than they once were. Beatrice was 48, her dark hair streaked with silver, fine lines around her eyes and mouth. But to each other, they were still the young people who had fallen in love under the New Mexico stars. "We're going to be grandparents," Beatrice said, still marveling at the idea. "Can you believe it?" "Barely. I still feel like we just got married ourselves. But Teddy's a good man, and Emily is a lovely girl. They'll be happy together." "Do you think we've done all right?" Beatrice asked. "As parents, I mean?" Tom considered the question carefully. "I think we've done our best. We've loved them, provided for them, taught them to be good people. What more can any parent do? Sometimes I worry that we've sheltered them too much, that we haven't prepared them for how hard the world can be." Tom took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "They're strong, Bea, all four of them. We've given them a good foundation, and now we have to trust them to build their own lives on it." Teddy and Emily were married that fall, in a ceremony much larger than Tom and Beatrice's had been. The whole territory seemed to turn out. Neighbors from miles around, friends from town, business associates, and ranch hands past and present. It was a joyous celebration, and watching his eldest son pledge his love to his new wife, Tom felt the circle of life continuing. Sure enough, the following year brought Tom and Beatrice's first grandchild, a little boy named Thomas James Barrett, called TJ. Holding his grandson for the first time, feeling the tiny weight of him in his arms, Tom was transported back to the day Teddy was born, to the overwhelming rush of love and responsibility he had felt then. He looked up at Beatrice, who was wiping away happy tears, and saw the same emotion reflected in her face. Rose did go to college, flourishing in her studies and eventually becoming a teacher, just as she had dreamed. She met a young lawyer in Santa Fe and married him, giving Tom and Beatrice 2 more grandchildren. The twins both stayed on the ranch, working alongside Teddy, and eventually marrying sisters from a ranch to the west, bringing even more life and laughter to the Barrett family gatherings. Through it all, through the weddings and births, through the successes and the occasional setbacks, Tom and Beatrice remained the center of their family. Their love for each other, so evident in every glance and touch, became the model their children sought to emulate in their own marriages. The story of how they met, no longer sanitized for young ears, became a family legend, a testament to courage and choice and the power of one good decision. On their 25th anniversary, their children threw them a huge party. It seemed like everyone in New Mexico showed up. The Brennan family, of course, now including Jacob and Mary's own grandchildren, neighbors and friends, business associates, even some of the old ranch hands who had worked for Tom in the early years. There was music and dancing and more food than anyone could eat, and countless toasts to the happy couple. At one point in the evening, Jacob pulled Tom aside. The old rancher was in his 70s now, his hair completely white, but his eyes were still sharp and his grip was still strong when he clapped Tom on the shoulder. "You know, that day you showed up at my ranch with Beatrice, I thought you'd gone crazy," Jacob said. "Spending all your money on a woman you didn't know, planning to just set her free. I thought for sure you'd regret it." Tom smiled, his eyes finding Beatrice across the crowded room where she was laughing with Mary and their daughters. "Best money I ever spent, best decision I ever made." "I can see that. You've built a good life, Tom. A good family, a good ranch, a good name. Your parents would be proud. Hell, I'm proud, and you're not even my son." "You've been like a father to me," Tom said, his voice thick with emotion. "You and Mary both. I don't know what I would have done without you. You would have figured it out. You're that kind of man. But I'm glad we could help. And I'm glad to have you as a friend, all these years." Later that night, when the party was winding down and their children were cleaning up, Tom and Beatrice slipped away to their bedroom. Tom helped Beatrice out of her fancy dress, something their daughter Rose had insisted on buying for her in Santa Fe, and Beatrice helped Tom with his string tie, which he had been tugging at uncomfortably all evening. 25 years, Beatrice said, sitting at her dressing table to take down her hair. A quarter of a century. Tom came up behind her, taking over the task of removing the pins from her hair, something he had done countless times over the years. "And I'd marry you again tomorrow if I could. Hell, I'd marry you every day if it were possible. Beatrice met his eyes in the mirror, seeing the love there that had never dimmed, never wavered. We've had a good life, haven't we? The best, and it's not over yet. We've got years ahead of us still. They did have years, though not as many as they would have liked. When Tom was 65 and Beatrice was 61, Tom's heart began to trouble him. The doctor in Los Lunas said it was worn out from years of hard labor, and there was nothing to be done but rest and take it easy. Tom, never one to sit idle, struggled with the restrictions, but Beatrice was firm. Teddy and the twins took over the day-to-day running of the ranch, and Tom reluctantly accepted his new role as advisor rather than active participant. He had 5 years of this semi-retirement, 5 years of spending more time with Beatrice than he had since the early days of their marriage. They took walks together every evening that weather permitted, sat on the porch in the afternoon watching their grandchildren play, and talked about everything and nothing. They were together when Tom's heart finally gave out on a quiet summer evening, sitting in their favorite spot by the creek. "Bea," he said suddenly, his voice tight with pain, his hand going to his chest. Beatrice was beside him in an instant, supporting him, calling for help. But even as she did, she knew. She could see it in his eyes, the knowledge that this was the end. "I love you," he managed to say, his hand finding hers and gripping it with surprising strength. "Always have, always will." "I love you too," Beatrice said, tears streaming down her face. "Tom, please don't leave me." But even as she said it, she knew she was being selfish. He was tired, his body worn out from a lifetime of hard work and harder living. His eyes were already growing distant, looking at something she couldn't see. "Beautiful," he whispered, and she didn't know if he meant her or whatever he was seeing. Then his hand relaxed in hers, and he was gone. The funeral was held at the ranch, just as Tom would have wanted. It seemed like half of New Mexico turned out to pay their respects to a man who had been respected and loved by all who knew him. Beatrice stood surrounded by her children and grandchildren, accepting condolences with grace, but inside, she felt hollowed out, as if half of herself had died with Tom. The weeks after the funeral were the hardest of Beatrice's life, harder even than the night she had stood on that platform in Los Lunas. She had been with Tom for 39 years, loved him for nearly 40. He had been her partner, her best friend, her great love. Learning to live without him felt impossible, but she had her children and grandchildren, and they rallied around her. Teddy moved his family into the main house so she wouldn't be alone. Rose came from Santa Fe as often as she could. The twins visited daily, bringing their children to cheer her up, and slowly, painfully, Beatrice learned to live with her grief. She found comfort in memories, in the life they had built together. She would sit on the porch in the evening, the time when Tom used to come home from working the ranch, and she would talk to him, telling him about her day, about their grandchildren's antics, about the ranch and how well Teddy was running it. Sometimes she wore his old jacket, breathing in the scent of him that still lingered in the fabric. Sometimes she reread the letters he had written to her during the few times they had been separated over the years, treasuring each word. 3 years after Tom's death, Mary Brennan passed away peacefully in her sleep. At her funeral, Beatrice reconnected with Jacob, now in his 80s and frail but still sharp as ever. They sat together at the reception afterward, two old friends who had shared so much history. "I miss him every day," Beatrice confessed. "People tell me it will get easier, but I don't know if that's true." "It doesn't get easier," Jacob said quietly, "but you learn to carry it. And you remember that you were lucky to have that kind of love at all. Most people never do." "We were lucky," Beatrice agreed. "All of us. You and Mary, Tom and me. We found our partners, the people who made us better than we were alone. And now Mary and Tom are together again, probably arguing about whose ranch was better," Jacob said with a slight smile. Beatrice laughed, the first real laugh she had managed since Tom's death. Tom would concede immediately. He always said the Broken Arrow was the finest ranch in the territory. She lived for another 8 years, long enough to see all of her grandchildren grown and to meet several great-grandchildren. She remained active in ranch life, offering advice when asked, but trusting her children to make their own decisions. She maintained her friendships, kept up her correspondence with Rose, and spent countless hours playing with the youngest generation of Barretts. But everyone could see that she was waiting. That part of her had been ready to go since the day Tom died. When she finally passed, peacefully in her sleep, at the age of 72, there was sadness but also a sense of rightness. She had lived a full life, loved deeply, and been deeply loved in return. And now she would be with Tom again. They buried her next to him in the small family cemetery on a hill overlooking the ranch. The whole Barrett clan gathered for the funeral: children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and even a few great-great-grandchildren. Teddy, now in his 50s and looking remarkably like his father had at that age, gave the eulogy. "My parents' love story began in darkness and desperation," he said, his voice carrying across the assembled family. "My father saw a woman in trouble and made the choice to help her, not knowing where that choice would lead. My mother found the courage to trust him, to rebuild her life, to love again after losing everything. Together, they built all of this." He gestured to encompass the ranch, the family, everything around them. "They taught us what real love looks like: partnership, respect, daily choice. They showed us that one good decision, one act of courage, can change everything. And they left us with the responsibility to carry on what they started, to preserve their legacy and pass it on to our own children." As they lowered Beatrice's casket into the ground beside Tom's, the sun broke through the clouds, sending shafts of golden light across the land they had loved and worked and built their life upon. A breeze carried the scent of sage and wildflowers, and somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed, the sounds of the ranch continuing as it had for nearly 50 years. The Barrett Ranch continued to thrive under Teddy's management, and later under his children's. The story of Tom and Beatrice became a family legend, told and retold at gatherings, a reminder of where they came from and the values they were built on. The small cabin where Tom and Beatrice had started their married life was preserved and maintained, becoming a sort of shrine to the couple who had founded the dynasty. In Los Lunas, the Silver Spur Saloon, where Tom had bought Beatrice's freedom, eventually burned down, and few people remembered what had once happened there. But in the Barrett family, the story lived on, passed from generation to generation. The tale of a cowboy who chose compassion over callousness, of a woman who chose courage over despair, and of the great love that grew from that fateful meeting. Their grave markers stood side by side on the hill, simple granite stones with their names and dates and a single line that Teddy had chosen: "Together, always." And though they were gone, their love remained, woven into the fabric of the ranch, the family, and the land itself, a testament to the power of choice, courage, and commitment that would endure as long as the Barrett name remained on the New Mexico territory they had claimed as their own. The ranch continued to grow and evolve with each generation, but certain traditions remained sacred. Every year on the anniversary of Tom and Beatrice's wedding, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. They would share the story again, embellishing some details, softening others, but always emphasizing the core truth: that love, real love, required courage and choice and daily commitment. The children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would listen with rapt attention, even those who had heard the story dozens of times before. They would look at the old photographs that had been carefully preserved: Tom and Beatrice on their wedding day, young and full of hope, Tom holding infant Teddy with wonder on his face, Beatrice surrounded by all 4 of her children, the 2 of them on their 25th anniversary, still clearly in love after all those years. And standing on that hill where Tom and Beatrice were buried, looking out over the land they had claimed and tamed and loved, their descendants understood that they were part of something larger than themselves. They were part of a love story that had begun in the worst of circumstances and had flourished into something beautiful and lasting. They were the living proof that one moment of courage, one act of compassion, one choice to do the right thing could echo through generations. The Barrett legacy was more than just the ranch, more than just the land and cattle and buildings. It was the love that Tom and Beatrice had shared, a love that had created a family and sustained them through hardships and celebrated with them through triumphs. It was a reminder that even in the hardest times, even when the world seemed dark and hope was scarce, love could prevail, love could transform, love could save. And so, the story of the saloon owner who sold her to the highest bidder, and the cowboy who won and set her free instead, lived on generation after generation, a beacon of hope and a testament to the enduring power of love in all its forms: romantic love, familial love, the love of friends, and the love of the land. It was a story that began with chains and ended with freedom, that started with strangers and ended with soulmates, that transformed tragedy into triumph and created something beautiful and lasting from the ashes of despair. Tom and Beatrice Barrett's love story was complete, their journey finished, their legacy secure. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind a family and a ranch that would carry their memory forward into the future. They had proven that even in the rough and tumble world of the Wild West, even in a time and place where women were often treated as property and compassion was sometimes seen as weakness, love could flourish. True love, the kind that sees beyond circumstance and status, the kind that chooses daily to honor and cherish, the kind that builds rather than takes, that frees rather than confines. Their story had a happy ending, not because it was without hardship or sorrow, but because they had faced everything together and had never stopped choosing each other, never stopped believing in the life they were building, never stopped loving with their whole hearts. And in the end, that was what mattered most. Not the size of their ranch or the number of their descendants, but the quality of the love they had shared and the example they had set for all who came after them. Under the endless New Mexico sky, where the stars still shone as brightly as they had on that first night when Tom and Beatrice rode away from Los Lunas toward a future neither could have imagined, their love endured, a story complete, a circle closed, a promise fulfilled. Together always, just as they had vowed, just as they had lived, just as they would be remembered for generations to come.